And this is Miss Christine Heath. Again, she's running for Utah House District 60. And she's going to give us a presentation tonight about what we can do to make policy changes to make Utah a safer place. Christine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kate. And before I get started, I want to do another big thank you to Jocelyn, Valina, Joe, and Carrie Rose for the comments and what you shared last night. That was very insightful and really great to hear from you. So tonight we're talking about policy, and what's so exciting about policy? Why do we want to talk about it? Well, the reason why we want to talk about it is because anytime we talk about a problem, we also want to talk about potential solutions. So to illustrate, a number of years ago when I was going to UVU, I saw that there was a presentation on human trafficking, and it's a topic that I'm passionate about, so I was willing to go in and sit for 8 hours to listen to different talks and presentations on human trafficking. And while I was listening, I was at the edge of my seat thinking, okay, what do we do to help solve this problem? How can I be part of the solution? And Q&A finally came up, and somebody asked, okay, well, what can we do to help? And they said, donate money. I was like, okay, what else can we do to help? And looked around, and they said, donate money. And I was taken aback, and again, we're in an auditorium full of students, poor students. I was like, we don't have any money. How are we supposed to donate? How can we be part of the solution? So the symposium was incredibly depressing for me because we talked about problems, but not what to do about it. So, as a continuation of last night, we're talking about policy and how we can move things forward. So there are 3 objectives that I have for my presentation tonight. One, obviously the policies, potential policies that we can do to help move the needle forward. 2, emphasize the importance of having you involved with politics and why we need you. And then 3, reassure you to let you know you're not alone in this. So starting off, let me share my screen. Catherine Esslinger put together some slides on how to address racial discrimination. And she couldn't be here, so I'm filling in for her. So first idea, let's see if whoops, missed one. Yeah, in education. Overall, Utah has reduced the number of suspensions, expulsions, and referrals to law enforcement in schools in recent years, but the disparity between racial and ethnic groups has increased. So some possible solutions: used trauma-informed approach to behaviors. And why is that so important? Well, it helps to know more about trauma and how that impacts the brain system. A lot of these things we didn't even know 10 years ago. This is a really exciting field to find out what's going on. So when you're talking about trauma in this setting, we're talking about fight or flight system has frozen. So if you've taken Psychology 101, you may have heard of fight or flight response, that if a bear comes out and jumps at you, then your body moves into fight or flight mode so that you can escape the bear or fight it to save your life. And then if fight or flight doesn't work, then the body moves into freeze mode. So that can look like being paralyzed a little bit. It looks different for different people. But if fight or flight fails, like if a child is being abused by an adult, well, the child can't fight back. The adult is 3 times as big as the child. The child can't run away because the adult would be able to catch them. So in that instance, fight or flight fails, and it's a traumatic experience. And so when you're talking about trauma, it's not just that one experience that's impactful. This can be relived over and over and over again. It has long-lasting impacts. So Dr. Ruth Lanius, she did a study on a couple that were involved in a really bad car accident in Canada. It was one of the worst ones there. And when she did a brain scan of Stan, who was the driver, when he remembered the event, the left side of his brain shut off and the right side of his brain was really, really active. And so something that's interesting is Broca's area in the brain, it shuts off offline. So you can't put words to an experience very well. And that can have a lot of impacts. And then his wife, Uta, when she was scanned, did the brain scan, and she recalled the event, her brain was pretty much inactive. Her body went into freeze mode when she remembered the trauma. And so these types of things can have a long-lasting impact. It's, even though something happened, 20 years ago, it can still impact behavior today. So what does that have to do with approach to addressing behaviors in school? Well, when kids have negative experiences, it can lead to drug use. 80% of people who are addicted to drugs have childhood trauma in their background. It can look like behavior problems and anger issues. And so if we have a trauma-informed approach, this can benefit all kinds of students. Because it's, when you look at the vocabulary of things, what do you think when you hear of like, oh, this punk kid, this punk student, versus this student is a trauma survivor? What type of treatment are they going to get there, and how is that going to look, and how will that impact the future? And fortunately, the more we're learning about trauma, we do have interventions that can take place so that PTSD is not locking people into a lifetime of traumatic events. There's EMDR is a promising treatment. Yoga is promising. Bessel van der Kolk, he's written a book on trauma and has a lot of things that you can look at there. So, better provide funding for services and interventions for at-risk students, particularly in Title I schools, because income plays a big role in good health and in good mental health. Ensure teachers and administrators understand the impact of implicit bias on discipline. So Jocelyn, she talked about last night how there is implicit bias, and how it's not just in schools that we need to make these reforms, but also in the universities where teachers are getting educated so that we don't do unfair discipline and disadvantage students. In policing, implement a use and force continuum for police encounters. Train officers to exhaust non-lethal means before using lethal force against suspects. And this is beneficial not just for the community, but for the police officers as well. I was talking to a mother of a police officer, and he had to shoot and kill someone on the line of duty and was completely distraught about it. And so that's not just horrible for him to go through, but think about the impact that that has on his family. I don't want any child to be saying, daddy's different now because of what happened at work. We want, good measures, good training for both sides. It would benefit everyone. So it will require police officers to intervene when a colleague is using excessive force, collect and publicly release demographic data for police interactions in every police jurisdiction. We can't change what we aren't aware of, and good transparency leads to good governance. Mm-hmm. Create and empower civilian review boards to review instances of police use of force and civilian complaints. In criminal justice, eliminate cash bail for nonviolent offenses, use a restorative justice model wherever possible, especially for young offenders. Offer this model to all offenders who've committed a particular type of crime so that we have a little bit more uniformity and we're not favoring one group of people over another. Use sentence algorithms, but do so with caution. They found with a lot of the algorithms that we do have there can be bias programmed in because who the programmers are, and it's not out of malice or anything. It's just we have blind spots, so we do need to be aware of potential blind spots and use caution. But exclude or reduce the impact of factors other than race that we can have discriminatory impact, like where the offender lives. Increase funding public defender programs so that more defendants have greater access to adequate legal representation. The company that I work for, they do a lot of, there's a legal branch to it, and they do a lot of pro bono work. And one of the speakers that I listened to mentioned that if people don't have access to the law, if you don't have rule of law, you don't have democracy. So again, this is important for the community at large. In the workplace, hiring discrimination against Black Americans is basically unchanged since 1990. Though it's illegal to discriminate in hiring practices, hiring discrimination can be unintentional on the part of the employers. Again, all of us, we have our biases. If anybody says that they're not biased, they don't know themselves well. We need to become aware of our personal biases. So some things that people can do, and an example of employee bias is, it used to be that women usually didn't get hired for the symphony, even though they had the same amount of talent. And so finally what changed for women to get hired in the symphony is that they had blind interviews. So you couldn't see who it was, you could just listen to how they played their instrument and how they performed. And when they did that, you had a dramatic increase in the number of women playing in the symphony. So, do that across the board. All employers can implement blind resume reviews when identifying information removed when applicants are first evaluated. Utah state government agencies already prescribe standard questions asked in all interviews for particular positions, so that interviewing is standardized for all job candidates. In your personal life, many of us live in segregated neighborhoods, and we go to school, worship, and work with people who are mostly of the same race. What, sorry? I thought I heard somebody say something.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, okay. All right. So, many of us are missing a lot of perspective in our lives. And so reaching out intentionally can make a difference. On social media, follow a wider range of public figures, artists, musicians, writers, and athletes of different races and different backgrounds. Listen to podcasts or radio shows hosted by people of other races, read books and written by the authors of with different races and ethnicities. And it's important not just to read about people of different races, but read the books by those authors, because that gives you a very different perspective. Develop friendships and get involved politically. So when you look at this list, you might be thinking like, Christine, you've got some blind spots. And yes, I do. And that goes into the next point of why we need to get you involved in politics. So to illustrate that, an example is, over 300 people die each year from being left-handed. And I was like, what's with that? It's not that they're doing anything, it's just that the tools that they're using, the safety features on those tools, were designed for someone who's right-handed, because the majority of the population is right-handed. And so, that bias, that hole in our vision can have a huge impact on other people with a different perspective. Another example is in India, there was the tsunami that took out a whole bunch of homes. And so the government decided they were going to rebuild a bunch of homes and did a building project, but all of the new homes didn't have a kitchen. And that's one of the most important rooms in the house, is because that's how you prepare your food. But in India, cooking is women's work. And the board who put the design together were all men, and they didn't consult women. And as a result, you got a bunch of houses that don't have a kitchen and don't have some of these basic necessities that a home needs. And so, I want to help you find some ways to get more involved in politics.